The first thing I noticed was how still she went when I sat down. Not tense, just careful. The kind of careful that belongs to someone who has learned to read a room before anyone in it has said a word. The second thing I noticed was my three closest friends pressed against the glass outside the restaurant window, watching. My name is Finn Marsh. I'm 32 years old, and I run a small woodworking and furniture restoration shop on Main Street in Harlan, Virginia, a town of about 4,000 people in the Blue Ridge foothills, where everybody knows what truck you drive, and everybody notices when that truck is parked somewhere new. I took over the shop from my uncle 3 years ago. Before that, I worked for him, and before that, I worked for a cabinet maker in Roanoke, who taught me that the way you treat a piece of old wood tells you something about the kind of person you are. I kept that. I kept the shop. I kept most things quiet. My younger sister Sarah has been deaf since she was 14 months old. Bacterial meningitis. Fast and brutal and over before anyone fully understood what had changed. Sarah is 28 now. She runs a ceramic studio in Charlottesville and teaches 2 nights a week and laughs loud enough that I can hear it through a phone screen. I grew up watching her move through the world and learning the language she moved through it in. By the time I was 12, signing felt less like something I was performing and more like another way of thinking. I kept that too. The setup was Owen's idea. He and Ray and Cassie have known me since high school. 3 people who find my general preference for quiet personally offensive, and have spent 15 years trying to correct it. They set up a dinner at the Mountain Rose restaurant on a Thursday evening and told me to show up at 7, that someone was coming they wanted me to meet, that she was new to Harlan and didn't know many people yet. They said her name was Yael Ashton. They said she was a new art teacher at the elementary school. They said very little else. I should have asked more questions. I know that now. I got there at 6:58. She was already seated at the corner table, a window table, which I thought nothing of at the time. Long dark auburn hair, hazel eyes. A sketchbook closed beside her water glass. She saw me come through the door and went still in the way I mentioned. Not frightened, just measuring. I walked over, I pulled out the chair. And then, without deciding to, without making any calculation about it at all, I raised my hands and signed her name. Yale? Her expression changed, not dramatically, just something eased. Her chin lifted slightly, her eyes went from cautious to curious. She raised one hand and signed back. How did you know? Know what? That I'd understand? I didn't, I signed. This is how I meet people. She looked at my hands for a second longer than was necessary, then she looked at my face. No, it isn't, she signed. I sat back a little. No, it isn't. So how did you know? I didn't. I looked at the table, then back at her. My sister is deaf. Signing is how I think. I'm sorry if that. Don't apologize, she said. She actually said it, out loud, clearly, and I understood then that she could speak, had always been able to speak, that the hearing loss was partial and complicated, and not the simple version that people in a town like Harlan had probably already decided they understood. Don't apologize, she said again. I'm just surprised. Outside the window, I caught movement. Owen, tall, red flannel, standing too close to the glass, Ray and Cassie beside him, all 3 of them staring in with expressions I couldn't fully read from where I sat. I turned back to Yael. She hadn't noticed them. I decided not to change that. Not yet. Whatever was happening outside was a problem I could deal with later. So tell me about the sketchbook, I signed. And just like that, we started talking. The conversation ran 2 hours and 40 minutes. I know because I checked my phone when we finally stood up to go, mostly just to account for where the evening had gone. Yael had moved to Harlan 6 weeks earlier from Charlottesville, which meant she already knew the city my sister lived in, which we talked about for a while. 2 people discovering an overlap they hadn't expected. She taught 2nd grade art. She had a particular interest in what she called threshold work, art made at the point where 2 materials met, the seam between things, where paper went ragged and paint went thin. She said most people tried to hide those seams. She found them worth looking at. She asked what I did. I told her about the shop. She asked what the work felt like, not what I made, what the work felt like. Most people ask what I made. I told her honestly. It felt like listening. You had to hear what the wood was already doing before you could decide what it needed. She nodded slowly. That's what drawing is, she signed. Most people think it's about putting something down. It's actually about paying attention to what's already there. I told her about the furniture I'd been working on that week. A Victorian writing desk with a broken timbre shutter. Someone's grandmother's piece. Badly repaired twice before it arrived in my shop. The kind of object that carried its history in its damage. She leaned forward. "Can I see it?" she asked. "When it's done." Not a question exactly, more like a statement with a question mark at the end. "If you want," I said. She held my gaze for a second. "I want." At some point I registered that Owen and Ray and Cassie were gone from the window. They'd been there for at least the first hour. Whatever they'd expected to see, me frozen, me flailing, me saying something wrong or nothing at all while Yael sat across from me wondering what was happening, they hadn't seen it. Eventually they'd apparently decided to leave. The problem with that was it meant I still didn't know exactly what they'd planned, and Yael still didn't know any of it. I knew something was wrong with the setup. I'd seen it on their faces when I arrived. But the gap between what I suspected and what I could prove was still wide. And the evening itself had been real enough that I didn't want to put something dirty on top of it just yet. So I left the restaurant and drove home and told myself I'd figure it out in the morning. I didn't figure it out in the morning. Owen came to me first. He showed up at the shop at 8:15 on Friday, before my first customer, while I was still letting the tools warm up. He came in the way people come in when they're deciding how sorry to be. "How'd it go?" he said. "I kept sanding. You were standing outside the window." "Yeah." He looked at the workbench. "Listen, Owen. We knew Sarah was deaf," he said. We thought you knew some of it. Basic things, not actually fluent." I set down the sanding block. "What did you think was going to happen?" He had the specific discomfort of someone who has been certain something was funny and is now realizing they were the only one. "We thought," he started. "I don't know. We thought you'd walk in, realize you couldn't talk to her, and just, freeze. We weren't trying to, it wasn't mean-spirited." "Who told you she has hearing loss?" I said. "Dana from the school board mentioned it at the coffee shop." Cassie overheard. "And you decided to build a dinner around it." He didn't answer. "Did anyone tell Yael that this was a setup?" I said. "No. So she came thinking she was being introduced to someone worth meeting. Finn, she walked in there thinking Dana wanted her to meet me because Dana genuinely thought we'd get along." I picked the sanding block back up. "And instead the three of you used the way she communicates as the punchline of something you thought would be funny to watch." Owen was quiet for a long time. "I didn't think about it that way." "I know." I wasn't angry at him in the loud way. That would have been easier for both of us. "That's the problem." He left without the thing he'd come for, which was probably permission to feel okay about it. I didn't have that to give him. I spent the rest of the morning working on the timbre shutter and trying to figure out what to say to Yael, not whether to tell her. That part one he already decided. She had the right to know how the dinner had actually been arranged. What I didn't know was how to hand that information to someone I'd met 2 days ago, and not have it ruin the only thing about the last 2 days that had felt genuinely good. I texted her that afternoon. I said I had something I needed to tell her and asked if she wanted to meet at the Mountain Rose again. Same table, same time. She replied in 40 minutes. "I know already," she said, "but yes." She was at the window table when I arrived. No sketchbook this time. She was watching the street outside, both hands in her lap, and when she looked up there was no smile to start with, just her face, which was honest and a little tired and paying attention. I sat down. I didn't order anything right away. "What do you know?" I signed. "That the dinner was arranged as a joke, that they knew I was hard of hearing and wanted to watch you not know what to do with me." Her hands moved carefully, without drama. I suspected it that night. Some things Dana said beforehand didn't add up. "And during dinner, you were calm in a specific way, like someone managing something unexpected." "I didn't want you to notice," I said. "I know, that's actually one of the things that convinced me." She looked at the table. Someone trying to hide their own discomfort is different from someone who has something to hide about the situation. "I confronted Owen," I told her. "I know that too. He texted Dana. Dana texted me. I looked at my hands. I'm sorry. Don't. Yael. Don't apologize for what they did, she said. You didn't know ahead of time. I know you didn't because if you had, you wouldn't have come. She looked at me. That's also one of the things I've been thinking about. I waited. You came back, she said. 2 days later, you texted me, and now you're sitting here telling me the truth even though telling me is a risk. That's not nothing. I didn't know what to say, so I said the plain version of it. I wanted to see you again. I still do. I just wasn't going to do it while you didn't know what the first dinner actually was. She looked at me for a long moment. The restaurant moved around us. Someone laughed near the bar. A server passed. My last year in Charlottesville, she said, after the hearing got worse. People started talking to me like I was something that needed managing. Everyone suddenly had a plan for how I should handle things, how I should be treated, what I probably needed. Nobody asked. Her hand slowed slightly. What I needed was exactly what I had before. People who talked to me like I was still the same person. You are, I said. She almost smiled. I know that, she signed. The problem is most people in a town like this don't. She was right about that. Harlan had already decided what it thought about Yael Ashton. I'd seen it in the 3 weeks since the dinner, people speaking too slowly or too loudly or directly to whoever was standing beside her, as if she needed an interpreter for a grocery list. She didn't ask me to fix any of it. She just told me, the same way she told me most things, plainly, without performing the weight of it. I want to keep seeing you, I told her, if that's what you want. She picked up her water glass. She set it down. She looked at me with the particular quality of attention I'd first noticed at this same table 3 weeks ago. The kind that didn't leave a lot of room for uncertainty about whether you had it. Thursday evenings, she said. I usually finish the schoolwork by 6. Thursday evenings, I said. She picked up her sketchbook. She'd had it in her bag, I hadn't noticed until now, and opened it to a blank page. She slid it across the table with a pen. Tell me about the desk, she said. The one you're fixing. Draw me the problem. I drew the timbre shutter. She looked at it for a long time. She drew something beside it, a different kind of seam, a different kind of repair. We stayed until the restaurant was nearly empty. That was the real beginning. The thing about Harlan is it's not a cruel town. That's important to understand, because what happened to Yael there wasn't cruelty. It was the particular thoughtlessness of people who had decided what she needed before asking. The hardware store, the diner, the school's front office. Everywhere she went, there was a version of the same transaction. Someone would look at her hearing aids or catch the slight quality of her speech and immediately redirect their attention to whoever happened to be standing closest to her. Spouses, colleagues, strangers. It didn't matter. She became the subject of sentences that started, "She'd probably like," or "You can tell her that," and the person speaking never looked at her face to see whether she was already listening. She told me about this on a Thursday in November, plainly and without particular heat. I correct it when I can, she said. Sometimes I don't have the energy. What does correcting it look like? Eye contact, standing where I can see them, writing things on my phone when speaking isn't working. She paused. Waiting. Waiting for what? For them to catch up. She looked at her coffee. Most people catch up eventually. They just need someone to stop doing it for them first. I asked what she wanted me to do. She thought about it, really thought, the way she did with questions she was taking seriously. Nothing, she said. Just don't be one of the people I have to wait out. I said I'd try. She said that was enough. Thursdays became the shape of things. Not every Thursday. Some weeks she was finishing a school project or working on her own drawings and just sent a short text to say she wasn't free. She didn't explain or apologize for it. I like that. Most people feel they owe you an account of their time. Yael didn't treat time that way. I started going to the shop earlier on Thursdays so I could close by 5:30. I never told her this. It didn't seem like information she needed. It was just a thing I did. The timbre desk was finished by the end of October. I sent her a photograph. She replied, "I'll come Saturday morning if that's okay." She came at 9. She spent almost an hour with the desk, opening the timbre shutter, closing it, running her hand along the repaired sections, crouching to look at the joints from below. She didn't say anything for most of it. I worked at the other bench and let her look. She didn't need me to explain it. When she was done, she signed, "How old is it?" 1887, probably. Victorian writing desk. Roll-top variation. Was it bad when it came in? Bad enough. Someone had used wood filler on the shutter. Wood filler. I made the expression that went with wood filler, and she laughed. "Did you save it all?" "Most of it. 2 of the slats were too far gone." "What do you do when you can't save something?" I thought about it. "You replace it as close as you can. The replacement doesn't pretend to be original. It just fits." She looked at the desk again. "That's a good answer," she said. She came back the following Saturday, and the one after that, not always to look at something specific, sometimes just to sit in the corner with her sketchbook while I worked. The shop was quiet in a way that seemed to suit her. No music, no background noise, just tools and wood and the particular hum of a space where things were being made or put back together. We talked a lot. We talked without talking sometimes. She would look up from her sketch and sign something short. I'd answer. She'd go back to the drawing. It wasn't the performing kind of comfortable. It was the kind that comes from 2 people deciding they don't need to fill the space between them just to prove they're present. Ray apologized in November. He caught me outside the hardware store and said he'd thought about it, and he was sorry. Not for the joke specifically, but for not thinking about what it was like to be Yael in the middle of it. That was more specific than I expected from Ray. I told him I appreciated it. I meant it. Cassie took longer. She sent a text in December that went through 3 versions of sorry before landing on the actual thing. That she had thought it was harmless because she hadn't fully thought about Yael as someone whose experience of the situation mattered. She asked if Yael and I were seeing each other. I said yes. She said good. I believed that too. Owen and I talked about it once more, properly, in January, over coffee at the diner, the way we'd been having difficult conversations since we were 17. He said he'd run into Yael at the grocery store and hadn't known what to say. He'd ended up writing his order on his phone and showing it to her so the checkout counter person didn't have to relay everything. She looked at me like I was an idiot, he said. "You were being an idiot," I said. "I know, but at least she looked at me directly." "She looks at everyone directly. She looked at me like a person," he said. I think that was the thing. He wasn't wrong. That was the thing. My sister Sarah came to visit in February. I had told Yael about Sarah early on. One of those conversations that starts as background information and lands somewhere more essential. Yael had listened with the specific quality she brought to things that mattered, fully, without rushing me toward a point. She'd asked one question at the end. "Does she know you learned for her?" I'd said I wasn't sure I'd ever made a distinction. Yael had looked at that for a moment. "Tell her," she said. "She'd want to know." Sarah came on a Saturday. She and Yael met at the shop at 11. I had cleared the main workbench for the occasion and immediately second-guessed myself because it looked cleared and therefore staged. Yael arrived first, looked at the bench, looked at me. "You tidied," she signed. "I work in a wood shop." "You tidied," she signed again, with the face that meant she was not negotiating this point. Sarah stayed 3 days. On Sunday afternoon, the 3 of us drove out to the Ridge Road and walked for a while. The kind of Blue Ridge February afternoon that's cold enough to make your face hurt, but clear enough that you can see the valley all the way to the next county. Yael had her camera. Sarah was doing what Sarah always did in unfamiliar places. Cataloging, I think, sorting things into categories. She does this with people too, which is how I knew she'd already made up her mind about Yael before they got to the Ridge Road. At some point, Sarah dropped back to walk with me. Yael was ahead, photographing something at the tree line. "She looks at everything," Sarah signed. "She does. Not in the way people look when they're performing. She actually sees things." "I know." Sarah looked at Yael ahead of us on the path. "You can tell," she signed, "because she doesn't need to tell you what she's seeing. She just looks at it." "You've been talking to her for 2 days," I said. "I know what I see." Sarah glanced at me with the expression she'd been using our whole lives when she was about to say something I didn't want to hear yet. "You've been different this year, since the fall." "Different how?" "Less inside your own head." I didn't argue. She was right and we both knew it. Yael turned from the tree line and saw us hanging back and signed something across the distance. her hands moving in the cold air, clear enough to read from 20 feet. "Come look at this," she signed. "Hurry up." Sarah laughed beside me. I started walking. Sarah came through the door and the two of them started signing before I could introduce them properly, which is exactly what I should have expected and had somehow not expected. I stood at my own workbench watching my sister and the woman I was in love with have a conversation I could follow perfectly and somehow didn't feel I was fully part of. Not in a bad way, just in the way of recognizing that something was happening that wasn't about me. I started sanding a chair leg. After a while, Sarah came over and signed. She's good, I know. Not just at signing, at looking at people. I know that too. Sarah looked at me with the expression she'd been using on me our whole lives, the one that meant she had understood something I hadn't said. "You didn't teach her," she said. "She already knew." That was the truest thing anyone said about Yael all year. There's a particular thing that happens with people in a town like Harlan when someone has a visible difference. A hearing aid, a signing conversation, anything that signals that the usual rules of interaction need adjusting. They start managing the person instead of talking to them. They relay messages through whoever's nearby. They make decisions about what's easier rather than asking. I had watched this happen around Sarah my whole life, and I had learned, slowly and by making mistakes, that the most useful thing I could do was almost always to stand back and let her handle it. Yael didn't need that lesson from me. She'd been learning the same thing on her own. But she told me once, on a Thursday evening in March, that what she noticed about me was the specific thing I didn't do. "Most people jump," she said. "Someone at the counter doesn't know how to make eye contact, and the person I'm with jumps in to explain, before I've had a chance to handle it myself." "Does it bother you when people jump?" "It bothers me that they feel like they have to." She pulled her jacket straight. "It means they're not sure I can manage." "You never do that." "You can manage," I said. "I know I can manage." A pause. "I'm telling you it matters that you know." I had repositioned the light above my main workbench in December, a small thing, something I'd done one Tuesday evening when she wasn't there. The old angle left the bench in partial shadow in the afternoon. I'd moved the fixture 18 inches to the right so whoever was sitting at the corner table, the spot she'd been using since October, could see faces clearly, including mine when I was working. I hadn't mentioned it. She noticed it the following Saturday and didn't say anything either. She just set her sketchbook down in the same corner and opened it to a new page. Some things don't need to be explained, they just need to be there. Dana called Yael in December. I know this because Yael told me about it on a Thursday evening, in the same matter-of-fact way she told me most things I needed to know. Dana had apologized. A real apology, not the kind that's actually a request for reassurance that the other person feels fine, but the kind that admits specifically what went wrong. Yael told me Dana had said she'd been so focused on watching me that she hadn't thought about what Yael would feel if she ever found out. That the hearing loss had seemed to her like a detail, a feature of the situation, rather than part of a person's actual life. "What did you say?" I asked. "I said I appreciated it," Yael signed. "I also said that turning someone's way of communicating into a prop for someone else's entertainment was the kind of thing that was hard to accidentally stumble into. You have to not be thinking about the person at all for that to happen." How did she take that? She cried a little. Yael picked up her coffee. "I think that was genuine. I think she actually hadn't thought about it that way until I said it." "Does that make it better?" "A little." She set the mug down. Not completely. She wasn't angry. That wasn't exactly right either. She'd been angry, she told me, for about a week after she found out. Not the loud kind, the kind that settled somewhere in her chest and made her tired. "What made it better?" I asked. She looked at the table for a moment. "Knowing it didn't change anything that happened after." She looked at me. "The dinner was real, the conversations after were real. That's not Dana's and it's not Owen's. They made the setup, they didn't make the rest." I thought about the 2 hours and 40 minutes of that first dinner, the half-bridge joke, the sketchbook closed beside her water glass, the 3 people outside the window who had expected something different and hadn't gotten it. "You figured it out that night," I said, "before I told you. I suspected. You still stayed for 2 hours. She was quiet for a moment. I was paying attention to what was in front of me, she said. The rest was behind me. I told her I loved her on an April evening. Not with great ceremony, we were sitting on the back step of the shop after closing, the kind of spring night that comes to the Blue Ridge, in the hour before dark, when the light goes sideways through the trees, and the air has finally remembered what it's supposed to smell like. She was drawing. I was watching her draw. Yael! She looked up. I love you. She set the pencil down. She looked at me the way she had looked at the Victorian desk, the long, careful look of someone who wants to know exactly what they're seeing before they decide what to think about it. That was direct, she said. I figured I'd say it while I was certain of it. Are you usually not certain? I'm usually careful. Those aren't the same thing. She picked up the pencil. She looked at the sketch. Then she set the pencil down again. I love you too, she said, out loud, the way she did when she wanted to be sure. Then she picked the pencil back up. I went back inside and turned the lathe on. We didn't make any declarations about what this meant for us. Didn't change what we called each other or announce anything to anyone. The town figured it out anyway. That's also what happens in a town like Harlan. Ray mentioned it to me casually in May, as if he'd known for months, which he probably had. My mother called from Richmond and said she'd heard I was spending time with the art teacher. I said yes. She said good. Yael renewed her school contract for a second year in June. She told me over breakfast at the diner she'd started coming by on Saturday mornings, and we'd fallen into the habit of walking down to the diner first and then heading to the shop. And she said it the way she said most things that mattered, plainly, without making a performance of it. I signed for another year. Good, I said. Good? What else would I say? She looked at her coffee. She was almost smiling. You could say you're glad. I'm glad. You could say you were hoping I would. I was hoping you would. You could say, Yael, yeah. I'm glad you're staying. She picked up her coffee. Okay, she said. Me too. One Saturday in September, a year and some weeks after Owen and Ray and Cassie had stood outside a restaurant window waiting to watch me fail, Yael and I were at the Mountain Rose for dinner. Same corner table, same window. We were there because she'd wanted to go back. That was her idea. She'd brought it up the week before, and I'd looked at her and she'd looked at me, and we'd both understood what we were deciding. Do you think about that first night much? She signed. Sometimes. What do you think about when you think about it? I looked at the window. No one was outside this time, just the street, and the last of the September light doing what September light did to the foothills. I think about the look on your face when I sat down, before you knew what I was going to do. I was trying to figure out if you were someone I was going to have to manage, and then you signed my name and I stopped wondering. She looked at her hands. It wasn't that you knew, it was that you didn't make it into a thing. It isn't a thing. To you. She looked at me. That's what I mean. I thought about Owen's face in the shop that morning, the discomfort of someone realizing they treated another person as scenery. I thought about the 14 months of Thursdays and Saturdays, and the chair legs and the Victorian desk, and Sarah signing across a cleared workbench, and the shop light moved 18 inches to the right on a Tuesday evening when Yael wasn't there. I thought about the first time I'd heard her laugh. Really laugh, the surprised kind, and the way it had felt like information I'd been waiting for without knowing I'd been waiting. I'm glad Owen is bad at keeping secrets, I said. Yael looked at me. What? He's the one who told me about the dinner. He came to the shop looking guilty and confirmed every guess I had. If he'd been better at covering it up, you would have figured it out anyway, she said. Maybe. You would have. She was firm about this. You notice things. She wasn't wrong. I'd noticed the look on her face when I sat down. I'd noticed the 3 people outside the window. I'd noticed the absence of real information in Owen's introduction. I'd noticed the exact way she went still when something unexpected happened. Not frozen, not frightened, just measuring. What did you notice about me? She asked. That first night. How still you went, I said. And then how you stopped. When I signed. You could see that? Yes. She thought about that for a moment. Most people would have said I seemed nervous. You weren't nervous. You were paying attention. She looked at me in the way I had come to know meant she was deciding whether to say the thing she was actually thinking. I knew about you, she said. Before the dinner, Sarah told me. I went still. She teaches a ceramics class in Charlottesville. I did one session as a guest, students drawing vessels, working in clay. She mentioned she had a brother in Harlan who fixed old furniture and didn't talk much, and was probably exactly the kind of person I would find interesting. When was this? April, before Dana set up the dinner. You didn't say anything. You didn't ask. A small pause. Also, I wanted to see what you'd do without knowing I already had a favorable impression. I thought it was a cleaner test. I looked at her for a long time. Sarah knew about the dinner. Sarah knew about the dinner. Sarah didn't tell me any of this. Sarah is better at keeping secrets than Owen, Yael signed. I looked at the window. Outside, the street was quiet. No one pressed against the glass. Just the ordinary September evening doing what September evenings did. The next time I see my sister, I said, I'm going to have a number of questions. Yael laughed, the surprised kind, the one I'd been waiting for. She said you'd say something like that. The server came by. Yael caught his eye, pointed at the menu, held up 2 fingers. He nodded. He'd learned. He'd been learning since October. Not because I'd asked him to, but because Yael had shown up enough times and been patient enough times, and eventually the right way of doing it had become the obvious way. That was also something I'd watched her do, not ask for adjustments, just wait for people to find them on their own. Most did, given enough time. Same table, I said, looking around the restaurant. Different dinner. Different everything, she signed, mostly. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Just set it there, no squeeze, no statement, just her hand. Outside, the September light finished what it had been doing to the ridge all evening. The street went blue-gray and then darker. Inside, the restaurant did what restaurants did. A year ago, I'd walked through that door, expecting 40 minutes and a polite exit. I'd gotten 2 hours and 40 minutes instead, and a woman who asked what the work felt like, rather than what I made, and the specific experience of watching a joke curdle into something that turned out to be the realest thing that had happened to me in years. I'd gotten Owen's face through the glass. Sarah on a February ridge road saying less inside your own head with the accuracy of someone who has known you too long to be wrong. Yael in the doorway of the shop on a Tuesday afternoon saying, "Come look at this." Hurry up like she'd always expected me to catch up. Some things you can't plan, some things you just have to show up for. Sit down at the table, raise your hands, and see what happens. I'd sat down. She was still there, so was I.